verehrte Trauergemeinde, distinguished mourning community. My name is Wilfried Imrich. I will say a few words about the life of Gert, then Pavol Hell, and I will say something, followed by Gena Hahn, they both came from Canada. Then Hannes will read a letter by Babai, a very long moving one. And then I will read a letter by Norbert, Polat, Sandi, Klavžar, François, Genest, and then Hannes will again read a letter by Bjarne, by Dankelmann, Mwambene, who sent it today. It is a wonderful letter, and then one by Bjarne Toft. So, dear friends, dear Mayor, dear Hannes, and dear Gert, we are sad you had to go and wish to say goodbye to you. To say goodbye and to tell you how much we enjoyed your company and esteemed you. Many of us, just mentioned them, have prepared collections of personal experiences and anecdotes. But let me first recall some of the earlier days. You were born in Graz, went to elementary school in Innsbruck, and in 1940 your father took on a position as a Protestant diacon in Vienna. It was World War II, and one of his duties was to give spiritual assistance to the resistance fighters who had been sentenced to death. And despite that, Gert showed considerable courage when dealing with recruiting officers for the army, luckily with no negative effects. Nonetheless, Gert, you had to serve, as most of your age, as an aide in anti-aircraft facilities and had to help the ditches against the Russians near Vienna. We got a letter. Of course, it did not deter the Russians long, and you were taken back to Vienna, given weapons. I think you had some grenades and one gun for 4 of you, of your age, and you had no uniforms, which was good for you, because on April 10, your supervisor suddenly disappeared. So you could go home, and 3 days later, on April 13, exactly 77 years ago, the Red Army had conquered Vienna. It was called liberation from the Nazis, but ironically, many were still in charge, also in school as teachers, and some of them caused you problems, luckily also not permanently. It was a breakdown. The Nazis had destroyed much of the infrastructure, and reconstruction took at least 15 years. Thus, in the first semester at the University of Vienna, where you studied, you had tickets for seats on every 3rd day. By the way, in my time, 12 years later, we already had tickets for every other day. So, but you heard lectures by the renowned Laszlo and Klavžar, and enjoyed the lectures of the Ehrenhaft, physicist, known for the Ehrenhaft miracle experiment. Then you heard a talk by Professor Schmitter on the 4-color theory. I say 4-color theory because that was the name before. And you decided to write the thesis on graph theory, as Professor Laszlo taught me. Klavžar accepted, but he said, you would have to look for a topic yourself. Anyway, it worked out. And then you wrote up your results for publication and sent them to Laszlo. Maybe Laszlo realized that the main result of the submission had already been published by Thomas McLean in 1943, but in any case, quickly suggested you for a scholarship in Princeton which you had granted. By the way, I should say, one of the jobs to earn a little money at Gert was to play the organ at funerals. So, this time the organ is played for you. So, Whitney suggested you for the scholarship, and you got the scholarship. There, you have to take the daily shuttle bus to the institute, and in the bus there were 2 seats reserved for Einstein and Böll. As Ehrenhardt had asked to extend greetings from me, this was a good reason for you to have vivid conversations with Einstein, and not only about physics, but about many other things too. Gödel, of course, never said a word. Now, there are incredibly many famous people there. As you once said, it was an ideal place to develop inferiority complexes. Let me just recall that you shared Georg with Mandelbrot and his fractals. So, and then you moved to Minnesota by plane. The department was dominated by topologists. You know, at that time, drag theory was considered to be the slums of topology. But it was a happy time for you with little teaching. Mega was born there. In 1960, Banaszewski called you to McMaster University in Canada, where you wrote your most cited papers. And this is where the stories of Pavol and Jaroslav could not come actually in 1969. You continued on to Montreal. And shortly before that, I met you abstractly. My dissertation was in the geometry of numbers, but the friend said I should do graph theory. So I said, how do you do graph theory? He said, oh, we just go to the library and read. If you find something, write it up and submit it to the topic. So I went to the library and read. I learned about cycles, lines, points. Oh, it was not mine. No. But suddenly, I ran across a paper by a certain Sabidussi, and a graph was called X, as topologists do. Yeah? It could be infinite. And there were products reminding me of Tichonov's theorem. Yeah? So I read that paper carefully, found something, wrote it up and submitted it, and guess who the referee was? So, Gert Laudisi. Only a year later did I find out that you were Austrian. And in person, we met first in Montreal in 1970, but from then on frequently. Otti, I, particularly Gabi, enjoyed your company. And the time we spent with you and Ghislaine in Montreal and vicinity. We had fun, but sometimes things had a nice twist. For example, you refused to be taken to a lobster place because you did not know how to eat lobster properly. Thank you for the many invitations to Canada, that you took the time to visit me and Gabi in Leeuwen, once even for a semester, and that I had the privilege of organizing a birthday conference for you, thanks to you with very distinguished participants. But all this is history and gone forever. Thank you for it, and goodbye, this time for good.
Everybody. My name is Pavol Hell. I was one of Gert's early graduate students. There is a lot I had Gert to thank for. I'm grateful to Gert for. Both in mathematics and in life. In mathematics for teaching me to appreciate elegance and beauty and simplicity and guiding my studies in early years. But more importantly in life, or where I am now, because he was a determining influence on my life. when Jarek and I left Czechoslovakia in August '68 in the hills with the Russian tanks, we came to Vienna and we were wondering what to do. And on the recommendation of one of our teachers, we met Professor Wilfried, wrote to Gert. And then I got this letter from Gert, dated October 24th, 1968, in which this changed my life more than almost anything else. He said he heard about me from Spitsky and about the Aric. And he organized the university that they will waive the admission, some procedures, and they informed us that we had been accepted as graduates starting immediately. And we were offered $2,500 a year, which was a lot of money for Czech immigrants leaving, confused about life. He said they'll pay for half of our travel and the rest will be alone. And he said we should immediately contact the Air Canada office in Vienna and request to arrange flights to Hamilton. We were, needless to say, very surprised. Please getting that letter. I found that letter because I recently retired and was cleaning my office. So let me just tell you a couple of other. Let me read you a little bit of a couple of other letters I found. Here in July of next year, he writes from Vienna that he just heard that we are in trouble getting paid because of some bureaucratic mix-up in the university. He says, if it is of any use to you, please avail yourself of the enclosed check. And if you need more, don't hesitate. So, I think I've been pretty good friend and supervisor to my students as well, but I don't remember ever offering such generous support with any trouble. He was really very, very good person. And then in maybe October of '69, Jarek has decided to return to Czechoslovakia. And I'm very informed Gert. And so he says, I had always assumed that whatever you do, the two of you would do the same. Whether you have made the right decision or not in the future, we'll tell. Should you reconsider, be assured that I will respect your decision. So this is, full Gert. Very kind, generous, and respectful of your choices. It was also very keen to share his enthusiasm for things in life, in particular travel and restaurants. And he had particular liking for New Orleans, where he spent a few years at Tulane, right? Maybe before Hamilton. So in '71, the maybe first or second Southeastern Raspberry Combinatorics Conference took place in Louisiana, and he and I traveled together. He said, I want to show you around New Orleans. So I'll show you a picture. Gert in New Orleans in 1971. Gena asked at lunch today some favorite meals, and I have to remember, I think it was Captain Stable in New Orleans, where Gert took me at that time. And I was very impressed. Lots of fun. So, the adventure on the way home, I have to tell you, on the way home we got pulled, crossing the border, we got pulled in and searched, a very thorough search. And we were trying to figure out why they picked on us. And then, I sort of concluded, Gert told me, so this is what we looked like at the time. Gert is a very elegant gentleman, could be a boss of an important crime family, among other things. And there was this burly hippie, hairy, there should be his bodyguard. So, kind of recommend to go. Yeah, Gena mentioned that he's seen this photograph. So actually, this is the close-up of this part of the photograph. This is another thing, one of my favorite memories of there. This is a reception after the seminar in 1971. In addition to Gert and me and the secretary, there is Polat and Bjarne. This was a memorable party in old Montreal. The university paid for a certain amount of drinks, and they served a very good champagne. Everybody liked it and got a little tipsy. And then, of course, we were numerous and very thirsty. That money ran out. So at that point, there was a kind of silence in the room. Gert whipped up his American Express card and said, "Continue pouring." The rest went on his card. I remember that I got so drunk at that party that I don't know when I left it, but I knew at home someone was shaking my shoulder. It was Gert making sure I was okay to see. And I didn't. All right, there's one more picture. I am told Kenya took this. It's not very good quality, but at the conference in Victoria in 2006, we put together those of us there who were Gert students and those of us who were our students and students of our students. So this is the whole Gert family that just attended one conference. Not everybody was there, of course. I am really grateful to Gert, and I want to thank him. He was a big, big man in my life. So the last picture here is Gena's portrait of Gert, and Gena is going to take over and speak next.
Gena Hahn was Gert's colleague, so to speak, but he was really like my mentor. This, I'll start with this, even though it wasn't planned. The picture I took for him, because he asked me to take a portrait for him for some pictures that I don't remember what it was. I just thought, popped it like that, and went upstairs in the department, still in the room. And the important part for me was that he was very happy. So, I think it's a pretty decent picture. Gert, in some sense, I owe him my mathematical life. I was studying with Alex Rosa as master, and I decided not to do China triple systems and do something else, something that I got interested in because Stefan Istvan Friedrich said, you know, this theorem of Sabidussi, I think it should be generalized. So it's a paper of Gert's from 1961 that I looked at and got 3 papers and a PhD thesis out of. So that's his first contribution. Second contribution to my life was, he was my external examiner. I was incredibly happy that this person of whom I was scared at the time was a big boss, somewhere up there, said the thesis was excellent. Then, many years later, I got a job at the University of Montreal in the computer science department of all things. And I continued to do mathematics and continued to work on the, let's say, graphic product of graphs. I could generalize this here, and now he would probably be happy to know that with Bjarne we managed to get rid of an assumption that everybody has ever worked on this problem put aside, either explicitly or implicitly. Sometimes there was a version of the paper which didn't forgot about it, and there was a correction and so on. So we probably fixed it, and I think it made me happy because it was sort of a missing piece of the puzzle. So much about me. My job here today is also to say thank you on behalf of his other students. Daniel, with whom I wrote a long paper that owes a lot Gert's editing because it was so meticulous and precise, and it was a quality that I admire a lot because so many papers are so like that. The other one is François, who wouldn't possibly say thank you because he died in December. Very young. And then there were other people around, like Benoit Lahoz, who was not his student, but who had many things to do with it. Yeah. So all the people who are alive, that is all except François, also would like to say thank you to Gert for all this stuff. The long paper with the clouds about homomorphisms ends with a note, 3 lines of thank you to Gert for his wisdom, for sharing his knowledge over all the years that we've known him. On a different kind of personal level, Gert liked to eat. I like to cook. He came many times to our house to eat. He did like a switch Quran and many other things. We once I cooked some shreds of celery root fried as a sort of. And oh yeah, I tried that too. So we had that in common. We did several things together. We organized 2 big conferences and published 2 books. Then we had one of the seminars that Pavol already mentioned we did. And it was wonderful because thanks to him and with collaboration of also Ivan Rosenberg, we had grants together which helped us survive and this loans and everything else. In some sense, he was as I said, a mentor and a grandfather to me, because his office was 3 floors up. And never I felt like it. I talked to him, he came down, and it was wonderful. Strangely enough, we didn't write a single paper together. I have many papers with his students, but except for the books, which was not. So I will stop babbling and say thank you, Gert, again for everything you've done for us.
I personally met Gert 15 years ago, so I don't know much about his work. I just drew a few drafts for him for the book, and we tried to finalize his book. But I'm going to read memories from some of your colleagues and from some of his students. My first trip to the West from behind the Iron Curtain, how I met Gert Sabidussi by Laszlo from the University of Chicago.
During my freshman year at the University in Budapest in 1969, I came across a paper that studied the symmetries of graphs, connecting graph theory and group theory. Having been tutored in these 2 subjects by my friends Lajos Polsha and Josef Pelikan, both of them 2 years my senior during high school, I found the concept appealing and began asking questions about it that I would then try to answer. Soon I found out that classic work on the subject had been done by a mathematician by the name of Gert Sabidussi, about a decade earlier. For weeks I would spend much of my spare time in the library of the Mathematical Institute, now Vienna Institute, learning to search mistakes, reading original research papers in English, mesmerized by the elegance of Gert's writing. By the end of my freshman year, I wrote a paper, my first paper in English, largely motivated by Gert's results. I knew that my paper fell, well, short of the ideal I had known by then, both in terms of mathematical elegance and in terms of the style of the exposition, not to mention my poor English. My English background consisted of 3 years of not particularly successful private tutoring. But I was hooked on the subject, which became one of my career-long fascinations that includes recent work more than half a century later. Back then, it took me a couple of years to produce results that I felt worthy of Gert's attention. In autumn 1971, still in college, I sent Gert a typewritten manuscript from Budapest to Montreal. The service was snail mail. It would reach its destination in a month or so. It did not help that I was living behind the Iron Curtain, under the watchful eyes of the Communist Party, paranoid about scientific exchange with the West. I was hoping for the best. What happened next was entirely unexpected. Gert's reply came in a big envelope that included 2 items. One of them had a green cover labeled Université de Montréal Technical Report, with my name as the author showing in the window. It was my manuscript, but not exactly. Gert rewrote it with obvious love and care. His rendering was true to its original content, but was vastly superior in style. I compared it with my original line for line and soaked up the difference. So this is how you say it. It was an invaluable lesson you cannot learn from reading other people's papers. It was my thoughts that he put into the right words. And then the other item. Gert invited me to spend 5 weeks on the summer in Montreal. All expenses paid to work with him. Wow, I had never been to the other side of the Iron Curtain. Even though Vienna was only a 4-hour train ride from Budapest, it was virtually impossible to get an exit visa, permission to leave the country. But my trip would not be a touristic visit, it was for study. So the exit visa application process went through different channels, through the Ministry of Education. First, the math department's party secretary had to sign off on it. He kindly did. Then the dean. Then the university's Office of Foreign Relations. Then the Division of Higher Education in the Ministry of Education. Then the Ministry's Department of Foreign Relations. That's where things stalled. I had a 5-minute interview with the deputy head of the department. She asked me the plain question, why you? Well, I guess the fact that at 21 I made a discovery that caught the attention of an overseas professor, this was not easy for the Ministry of Education to swallow. After all, so many far more senior people do not get such invitations. Something stank here. My exit visa was denied. I told the story to Professor Paillard, one of my informal mentors at Utrecht University and one of the most highly respected mathematicians in the country. It turned out that an old friend of Professor Turan's was in high party office. It was already summer when I got a message from the Ministry of Education to urgently bring in my paperwork for review. This time the outcome was favorable and I was permitted to apply for the Canadian visa. My invitation on Université de Montréal letterhead was found to be satisfactory, and at the beginning of August 1972, I landed at Montreal-Laval International Airport, my first visit to the West, arriving within 7 weeks delay for a 5-week visit. I presented my passport to the immigration officer, May I see your letter of invitation? I did not bring it along, I used it to get my Canadian visa. Do you know the person who invited you? No. Is he here at the airport? I hope so. There I was, in a place where I knew no one, without a penny. The Hungarian currency was not convertible and the purchase of foreign currency was illegal in Hungary. Gert was there. The immigration officer invited him into his cubicle. That was the first time I saw Gert, but he did not have the opportunity to greet me. Genial, self-assured, he had an amiable 45-minute conversation with the officer in harmonious French, of which I did not understand a word. Apparently the officer's concerns had been alleviated, and I was admitted to the Dominion of Canada with a nice stamp in my passport. On the way to town, Gert explained to me that he would introduce me to the departmental administration, who have my money ready in cash, and to some friendly young colleagues who would then show me to my apartment, where the fridge was ready for me with food. The colleagues also taught me how to use such tricky devices as the shower handle. Everything was thoroughly and thoughtfully prepared for my arrival. Except that Gert also informed me that the next day he would leave for a 6-week vacation in Italy. The friendly colleagues would be leaving in a week. It looked like I would be spending 4 out of my 5 weeks in isolation in a place where I did not even know the language. Gert would not let that happen to me. He called up colleagues across Canada and arranged that I would visit a number of universities, each one paying one leg of my trip. I lectured in Winnipeg, Calgary, dipped my toe in the Pacific in Victoria, on the way back stopped in Hamilton, Ontario, and added Toronto on my own initiative because through correspondence I had already known Eric Mendel's son there. I was treated with kindness at each place as a member of my host's family. Finally, I had 2 rather lonely weeks in Montreal, wrote up 2 papers by hand, and left them on Gert's desk. Back in Hungary, a couple of months later, I received 2 Université de Montréal tech reports in the mail. Gert continued to promote my career. 8 years later, when I was finally able to visit the US for a semester, he helped me add 8 months, mostly in Canada, but also allowed me to visit the West Coast, including Berkeley and Stanford, spend a month in Toronto and another in Waterloo, and attend several conferences. That period was amongst the most successful in my entire career. The places I mentioned represented my entry into computer science and directly led to my job at the University of Chicago 3 years later. I owe my new world career to no small degree to Gert's kindness and unfailing attention. Once I became more confident in my English, I began paying back Gert's kindness to my students and colleagues, doing what Gert had done for me even before we first met, revising their papers and helping with their careers. He was the model I have been trying to emulate ever since.
Let me continue with the letter by Norbert Polat from the Université de Montréal, tribute to Sabidussi. I met Gert when he arrived in Montreal in 1969 as a professor of the Department of Mathematics at the university. He did not speak French at the time, but as a result of his great openness to culture, he quickly mastered the new language, also because he insisted that everybody spoke French to him as much as possible. Because of his knowledge of math theory and his ability to direct students, I quickly contacted him to learn this theory, which was unknown to me at the time. He immediately provided me with an active document developed for his courses, which allowed me to learn the basis of this theory. What I liked most was the algebraic approach he had developed. It was an original way of treating the subject. It became, with time, a main characteristic of his approach. Because of my appreciation of Gert, I chose him as a PhD supervisor. And on my return to France, I asked him to be part of the jury of my doctorat d'etat. We wrote several papers together, and I particularly remember during one of his summer stays in Vienna, our daily meetings at the Parc de la Tête d'Or, where we wrote one of these papers, and where Gert always thought of the birds that were there and brought some food for the sparrows. Not long ago, I asked Gert about one of those papers, and he immediately said it was so wonderful when he was there with Norbert Polat in the park, and the sun was shining, and they were writing the papers. I think these papers they wrote together are really belong to the top papers of Gert, but unfortunately they have almost no citations. And maybe the reason is that Norbert wrote in one of the papers that this finishes off the subject. Yeah, they have a complete solution. But actually it was not so. There are new aspects, and that's how I ran across the paper. Every time, now let me continue. Every time I was in Montreal, I participated in his research group, and he welcomed me generously. Our regular appointments on Monday afternoon, after my final return to Montreal, always started with a warming up by discussing anything. Politics, teaching, restaurants, and so on, and the whole thing ended with serious research. His international influence and his many contacts have allowed him to be invited to many congresses and stays around the world. France, Denmark, Austria, USA, Zimbabwe, and so on. In all these countries, he was not content to limit himself to research in mathematics, but he was also interested in the history, art, and literature, which showed his great culture. We also had an excellent friendly complicity, because we shared good times and good restaurants. He loved to eat, we already heard that, and could enjoy good food. He even came to my wedding in Lyon, where he could show that he was Viennese by dancing. Of course, he was known to raise his voice often, but in any case, those who worked with him liked him very much. He has contributed to the training of many students who have become excellent researchers all over the world. The last time I saw him in Vienna in 1918, I was surprised to see his interests in gardening. He liked his Carlo, and we were there, like in the past, and a good glass of scotch. He was happy with our visit, Polat was there with his wife, and he was delighted to introduce us to the typical Viennese cuisine. The next morning, he came to wish us a safe return to Lyon. He was in good shape at that time. That was 218. In the years that followed, we communicated many times by phone, and I could see that his health was declining more and more. But his mind was still sharp on January 22 during the last conversation. Thank you, Gert, for having been present in my life. Can I continue? Then there's another letter of Sandi Klavžar from Bjarne with farewell greetings. Gert has always inspired in me deep respect, both mathematical and humanly. Mathematically, I consider him an informal grandfather because of the effect he had on my PhD supervisor regarding graph products. Gert pioneered this wonderful field of graph theory and proved many fundamental results that will forever remain his legacy. On the other hand, he also had a broad understanding of mathematics and what was going on in the world. Let me share just one detail with you. When we met at the conference in Montreal, he said to me that graph theories should label graphs with X instead of G, so that the scientific community would take us serious. I was much too young to understand this remark at the time, and it is only many years later that I have grasped the depth of his remark. It reveals, in an insightful way, the conservative acceptance of the world by mathematicians. On a personal level, he has always reminded me of my father. In 1999, when we held the fourth Slovene International Conference in graph theory in Blake Castle, the conference was dedicated to Gert's 70th birthday. At least we had a Sabidussi day. And it suddenly became clear to me, well, why this was so. At the conference reception we had at Blake Castle, Gert and I were chatting and enjoying the spectacular view from the castle. When, for some reason, I asked him where his roots were from. He pointed westwards and said that his roots are just a few valleys west from there, from Blake. In Italy. As it happens, my father was born almost in the same direction, just a few valleys closer. So, Gert, thank you for all the mathematical and personal wisdom you have shared with me. Rest in peace. That was Sandi. Should I continue? And then there's another letter by François Genest, Université de Montréal. He writes, I met Gert in 1997 when I was looking for an advisor for the money. I fell under his charm immediately. I had no experience in graph theory, and I expected to be asked to follow a graduate course on the subject. Instead, he graciously asked the former student to provide me with their notes, and all I had to do was to demonstrate my understanding by presenting some of the results. He writes, there was no hand-holding, no jumping through loops, just the joy of doing mathematics. I was doubly charmed, as he was impeccable in manner, smartly dressed and perfumed, and my wife said, the only competition I had to fear. Most of all, his warmth and friendship made me feel welcome and gave me confidence in my abilities. Through him, I met many great people, and I look back on my years in research as a cherished part of my life. Gert, you will always be in my heart. Farewell.
We also have a letter by Dankelmann, University of Johannesburg. This one is in German. Gert ist oft und gern nach Afrika gereist. Und seit Herr Fleischner uns einander vorgestellt hat, wofür ich ihm sehr dankbar bin, schlossen diese Reisen meistens einen Besuch bei mir und meiner Familie in Südafrika mit ein. Sehr bald wurde Gert nicht nur ein Kollege, sondern ein lieber Freund. Auch meine Kollegen schätzten seine Besuche sehr. Ich wurde unzählige Male gefragt, when is Sabidussi coming again? Gerts Wissensdrang hat mich immer beeindruckt. Ich erinnere mich an einen der vielen Nachmittage, an denen wir gemeinsam einen Café in Melville, einem malerischen Viertel in der Nähe meiner University of Johannesburg, besuchen wollten, um ein paar Gedanken über ein mathematisches Problem auszutauschen. Er entdeckte ein Antiquariat in der gleichen Straße, das wir natürlich gleich erkunden mussten. Seine Beute war eine Geschichte der University of the Witwatersrand, die die älteste Universität in Johannesburg war. Am nächsten Tag schon konnte er mir viele interessante Details aus der alten Zeit dieser Uni erzählen. Mir im Gedächtnis blieb die Geschichte, wie dort schon vor fast 100 Jahren der erste afrikanische Dozent für eine der hiesigen schwarzen Landessprachen eingestellt wurde und wie dies konservative weiße Studenten pikierte, die es unter ihrer Würde befanden, von einem Eingeborenen zu lernen. Ich hatte das Gefühl, dass Gert fast eine gewisse Schadenfreude empfand. Ich war dankbar, dass er mich so oft an dem riesigen Schatz seines Wissens hat teilhaben lassen. Auch ein Kollege aus dem Nachbarland Zimbabwe meinte einmal, dass Gert wahrscheinlich mehr über die Geschichte seines Landes wusste als er selbst. Überhaupt navigierte Gert das manchmal schwierige Terrain der schwarz-weißen Beziehungen in Südafrika durch seine Menschlichkeit und Leichtigkeit. Gert war der erstaunlichste Diabetiker, den ich je kennengelernt habe. Wir teilten eine große Vorliebe für Cream Scones. Das sind kleine Küchlein mit Marmelade und Sahne. Und wir haben etliche Dutzend davon gemeinsam genossen. Diese waren oft der Ausgangspunkt für wunderbare Gespräche, die manchmal zu mathematischen Entdeckungen, aber immer zu großem Vergnügen führten. Avocados halfen ihm dann, seinen Blutzucker schnell wieder ins rechte Lot zu bringen. Meine Frau Laszlo, die Gert sehr ins Herz geschlossen hatte, und ich freuten uns immer sehr auf seine Besuche. Sie waren jedes Mal ein Vergnügen und eine Bereicherung für uns. Wir haben ihn in den letzten Jahren vermisst, aber wir sind dankbar, dass er so oft bei uns war. Wenn es im Himmel in Afrika gibt, ist er bestimmt auch dort ein regelmäßiger und gern gesehener Gast. Alles Liebe, Peter und Hazel. I will continue with another letter from Africa, from Eric Mwambene, from the University of Western Cape in South Africa. I have refused to entertain the idea that Professor Gert Sabidussi eventually succumbed to the exigencies of life. Largely, it is because he was no ordinary human being. One has to look at the depth and clarity of his work to appreciate that he was not really an ordinary human being. The majority of what he did is still mysterious to the majority of us. Yet, he made it a mission to communicate his thoughts, his emotions, his love, his passion, and what he did not fancy in a very clear terms. Both in speech and writing, he was crystal clear what he felt. I was privileged to be his student. I love his taste of his mathematics. It is elegant, broad, deep, and with a pinch of lemon. He was meticulous in everything he did, basically a man of style. He delicately chose what he ate, wore, and did. He was not in a hurry to impress anybody. Those of us who were privileged to be mentored by him found a father who loved us dearly. I could ask help beyond the mathematics, knowing that he would always, at face value it may have seemed hesitant, give you the best that was available. Ultimately, I am yet to find someone who will ever come closer to his honesty. Another aspect is that he was brought in love and life. For him to be a father to a stranger like me at such a deep level reveals the other dimension of him. He had no spiritual boundaries most people create for themselves. The giant was catapulted into heaven. We are much poorer without him. The last letter is by Bjarne Toft from the University of Southern Denmark. Dear Gert, it is a great loss that you are no longer among us. We mourn. But at the same time, we are grateful and glad for the enrichment you gave to our lives. We shared much in the last 37 years, from our first telephone conversation in 1985 to the last one on Tuesday 2 weeks ago. Conversations, collaborations, excursions, and visits. Around 1990, you got heavily involved in studying Julius Petersen and his time, Nobody reached you in mathematical and historical insight. Your enthusiasm was out of this world. You learned to read Danish. You visited places and institutions around the world to dig out material. And we published an annotated Peterson bibliography. You did not stop. You revised it with new annotations and with detailed chronology within each year. Amazing and not seen before. Unpublished, but much improved compared to the published one. And you decoded the correspondence between Peterson and Sylvester. They corresponded in English, French, and German, often with very bad handwriting. In the whole world, only you could do this properly, with your linguistic and mathematical deep insights. What an achievement. You have many admirers. 10 years ago, A.S. Frankl from the Weizmann Institute wrote, Sabidussi did and continues to do excellent algebraic graph theory, including insights into the automorphism group of graphs, studies of stable graphs, Sabidussi representation theorems for symmetric graphs, Sabidussi's compatibility conjecture, etc. Many leading mathematicians throughout the world are working on problems and insights initiated by Gert. He does all this in a relaxed, playful way, as I witnessed when I acquired my own Sabidussi #1. I can only endorse that statement. Dear Gert, we miss you, your helpfulness, your enthusiasm, your insight, your ironic humor, and your complaints about the state of affairs, both in the small and the large. To have known you is a joy, an inspiration and a gift. Thank you. Yours sincerely, Bjarne.